The realization that life truly begins to make sense when experienced from someone else's perspective hit me the moment I became a father. Growing up, my parents often reprimanded me for my late-night adventures, my scrapes, bruises, and the mischief I constantly got into. At the time, I dismissed their concerns, thinking they were just part of growing up, nothing serious or alarming. I never stopped to consider the impact my actions had on them. I didn't think about how my mother must have felt when she had to face the school principal because of my behavior, or how she had to apologize to the parents of the kids I had hurt. I couldn't fathom the sleepless nights she must have endured, worrying until I finally came home, or how she patched up my worn-out pants, saving every penny just to buy me new ones after I destroyed them. Then, unexpectedly, life took a turn. I met Ellie through my friend Joseph, who introduced me to her and her friends. We spent time together wandering around the city, sitting on benches, sipping coffee, and enjoying each other's company. To be honest, it wasn't even coffee, just a warm drink, but it didn't matter. We laughed and cherished the simple moments. Of all the girls in our group, I found myself particularly drawn to Ellie. She was a quiet one, serene and graceful, with deep brown eyes that seemed to hold a world of calm. Before long, I asked her out for a more formal date. Our friends were skeptical about us. After all, I was a troublemaker, and she was the brilliant, graceful student. Yet, against all odds, over a year later, we tied the knot. Getting married was a turning point. I had matured, but character isn't something you change in an instant. I found a steady job, started taking better care of myself, and learned how to control my emotions. I simply grew up. I also felt a deep responsibility, not just for myself but for my wife. Ellie, on the other hand, was an amazing partner, an excellent hostess, knew all the recipes by heart, always kept the house clean, and got along wonderfully with my mother. My mom would sometimes exclaim, "Why did God reward you with such a wife?" She would tease me, saying, "You're such a jerk, and she's such a sweet girl. She tolerates everyone and takes care of you. You're lucky she didn't reject you the first time, that she saw something good in you." But I still can't figure out what she saw. Of course, my mom was exaggerating. I wasn't perfect, but I was a good husband. I didn't offend Ellie. I didn't indulge in bad habits, and I made sure I provided well for her. I stayed faithful, worked hard, and generally behaved as a decent man. However, despite my efforts, there were still moments that highlighted how different Ellie and I were. She was quiet, often attending friends' birthday parties not to socialize, but to try new dishes and jot down recipes. She preferred staying at home, doing something productive like cleaning or organizing. In contrast, I was the life of the party, the center of attention, cracking jokes, making loud entrances, drinking, dancing, and telling stories. Ellie, on the other hand, would usually sit quietly, talking to one or two close friends. When I made dark humor jokes, she would just twirl her fingers at her temple, a subtle gesture only I could notice. She couldn't understand how anyone could find such things funny. How could such a sweet girl like her be with someone like you? My friends would joke. Did you hypnotize her? Did you take her t-shirt and consult a fortune teller? I'd laugh at their jokes. But deep down, I appreciated that fate had brought us together, though I had no idea what the future would hold. For years into our marriage, Ellie told me she was pregnant. I was overjoyed, but at the same time, my thoughts quickly turned to fatherhood. I thought about how much of me would be passed on to my child. Would they inherit my reckless character? How many times had I climbed construction sites, jumped around garages, knocked over apple trees, ridden my bike on dangerous roads, and explored abandoned basements? What if my child grew up doing the same things? What if it was even worse? It was only as Ellie's pregnancy progressed that I began to realize how dangerous and scary it was to bring a child into this complicated world. I thought about how terrifying it would be to let them loose in the world, and if they followed in my footsteps, I could only imagine the heart attacks it would cause me. The day Ellie gave birth, I was a mess. I couldn't settle, couldn't focus. It felt like I was floating, overwhelmed with emotion. All I could think about was how badly I hoped my son wouldn't turn out like me, a reckless, impulsive troublemaker. If he took after Ellie, I would feel relieved. She was quiet, calm, and gentle. It would mean fewer gray hairs for me, fewer nervous breakdowns as I watched my child navigate life. I foolishly believed that the universe had rewarded me with another gift, that my wish would be granted. Perhaps in the excitement, I even said something along those lines when my son was born. And as it turned out, the universe had listened. My wish came true, and my son, in his early years, was calm and collected, far more like Ellie than me. But as he started to walk, I began to have second thoughts. I started to realize that life, with all its unpredictability, wasn't as simple as I had hoped. Parenting, just like any other experience, was a journey, and no amount of planning could guarantee the outcome. Initially, Ellie and I felt proud of our roles as parents. Ellie, ever the epitome of responsibility, had always been a diligent and loving mother. She had been remarkably well-behaved as a child, with the most rebellious act being stepping into a puddle with her Santa's shoes. Our son, Asher, was the center of our world. We poured our hearts into raising him, giving him everything we could: love, attention, and the best of what we had. However, soon small inconsistencies began to unsettle me. One such discrepancy was Asher's hair. While both Ellie and I had dark hair, Asher's hair was a striking blonde, almost like summer wheat. At first, I dismissed it as something trivial. My mother, a medically knowledgeable figure, reassured me, explaining that it was common for children's hair to darken as they grew older. She believed the pigmentation would develop over time, and so I chose to trust her expertise and wait. But as time passed and Asher grew older, my concerns lingered. His hair didn't seem to change. If anything, he had noticeable bald patches near his temples, which became a source of discomfort for me. While it wasn't a major issue, I worried that it might lead to teasing at school, recalling my own experience with a classmate who had a similar condition. Despite these worries, life moved forward. But Asher's features became more distinct and less like mine or Ellie's. His eyes were clearly Ellie's, but his smile didn't seem to belong to either of us. His nose was completely foreign, and his small, neat ears stood in stark contrast to my own prominent ears. Yet, the most alarming detail remained: his blonde hair and the same thinning hairline I had seen in my old friend Joseph. The resemblance between Asher and Joseph was too striking to ignore. The doubts gnawed at me until I felt compelled to investigate. I dug out old photos of Joseph and compared them to pictures of my son, finding too many unsettling similarities. The realization hit me hard. My son, Asher, bore an uncanny resemblance to Joseph. My heart sank as I confronted Ellie. The moment she saw the photo, she froze, her face betraying her emotions. Before she could even respond, the tears began to flow. There was no need for further explanation. Watching Ellie break down before me, I felt as though the life we had built was slowly unraveling. With a heavy heart, I began to tear apart the bathroom where the betrayal had taken place, stripping away every last tile, dismantling it piece by piece. I didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, I was consumed by the need to start over. Perhaps this act of destruction, of tearing down the past, would bring some sense of closure or relief.